Hello again everyone, and welcome to 66 Books, a series of 66 short podcasts that look at the 66 books of our modern Bible. And you've reached the book of Lamentations, the book of Laments. You know, Lamentations is considered by many people to be a bit of a dirge. A poetic elegy written in a graveyard, someone once said, a bit of a spiritual wailing wall. That's interesting because the darkness of its tone has probably led it to become one of the most neglected books in our Bible. Nowhere in the brief book does the author give his name, yet there is little doubt that the author was Jeremiah. There are 5 reasons why most people reach this conclusion. Firstly, the book is a lament, and we are told Jeremiah wrote a lament for Josiah. We're told that in 2 Chronicles chapter 35. Secondly, the book was written by an eyewitness of Jerusalem's siege and their subsequent fall and destruction. Jeremiah not only witnessed the fall of Jerusalem, but also remained behind after the captives were deported. We know that from Jeremiah 39. Thirdly, elements of the writing style are identified by many Bible experts as similar to Jeremiah. These similarities are striking, and many, especially in the poetic section, can be found. For example, his use of the word daughter, which occurs 20 times in each book. And of course the same expression of grief over Judah's downfall is evident in both books. Another reason is, in an early version of the Septuagint, a marginal inscription on the book of Lamentations identifies him by saying this: Jeremiah sat weeping and lamented with his lamentations over Jerusalem, saying. So that appears as a marginal introduction to an early copy of this book. And then finally, a strong and a persistent tradition historically maintains that Jeremiah wrote this book. This was the position of the earliest Talmud and also the early Christian writers like Origen and Jerome. And even reformers such as Calvin and numerous modern commentators have supported this view ever since. Who was it written to? Well, Nebuchadnezzar's siege on Jerusalem was from January 588 BC to July 586 BC. Jerusalem, we know, fell on July the 18th, 586 BC, and on August the 15th of the same year, the city and the temple were burned. Jeremiah probably wrote these elegies not long after the destruction, just before he was taken into Egypt, which is documented in Jeremiah chapter 34. So the date of the writing was probably late in the year 586 BC. The recipients were the Jews, who observed the destruction of Jerusalem as well as Edom. Thinking about the message. Well, the subject is a lament over the destruction of Jerusalem. The term Lamentations comes from a Greek word which means to cry out loud. The book consists of poems of mourning over the utter destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by the Babylonians. The message is sin brings lamentation, but God is faithful to his promise to be merciful. The literary structure of the book of Lamentations is simple and obvious, even in the modern text, and more so in the original text. The book consists of 5 poems, 1 for each chapter. These 5 poems are all acrostics. In other words, each verse begins with a word whose letter is one of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, except in the longer chapter 3, where 3 verses are allocated to each letter. 4 chapters were written with what is called a limping meter. That's an unusual term, but it is a term that meant a particular cadence which was used in funeral marches and funeral dirges, and thus was seen to be most appropriate for these laments over the destruction of Jerusalem. While obviously there is a deep emotion on the part of the writer, what he is writing is the product of reflection and deliberation. So chapter 1 is the first lament over the desolation of Jerusalem. Chapter 2, the second lament over the destruction of Jerusalem. Chapter 3, the third lament, expresses the distress of Jeremiah over witnessing such events. The fourth lament in chapter 4 talks about the defeat of Jerusalem. And then finally the fifth lament sees the desire of Jeremiah for restoration. So thinking about why this book was written, its purpose. Experts believe there were three purposes behind the writing of the book of Lamentations. One purpose of Lamentations is to express mourning over Jerusalem's destruction. For more than 50 years Jeremiah warned of coming judgment. Now the holy city had been laid waste and desolate. God's promised judgment for sin had come, but instead of exulting over the fulfillment of his prophecy, Jeremiah mourns and weeps. Part of the purpose is to express the sorrow that lies in the heart of Jeremiah and God over the destruction of the city. A second purpose of this book is to confess sin and acknowledge God's righteous judgment. This is not just mourning and misery here, there is also confession. The attitude of the book is, look, we have sinned, yet God is holy. He is righteous to judge. And a third purpose of the book, many believe, is to express, yet through this, God's hope in future restoration of his people. God has judged, it says, but he will remain faithful to his covenant promise. So in summary, Jeremiah is a book that laments the destruction of Jerusalem, but recognizes that God is righteous in judging and will remain faithful to his people. The lesson for us is that sin always will bring about lament, but God is faithful to his promise, and he will always be merciful.